There is something nobody tells you about becoming intelligent. You don't need to remember more. You need to learn differently. Think about the last time you tried to teach yourself something. You watched a video, you read an article, you highlighted a few sentences, maybe you even took notes. And while you were doing it, everything made sense. Then 2 days later, someone asked you a simple question about what you learned, and suddenly your mind was empty. You hadn't forgotten the information. In a strange way, you never actually learned it. You recognized it. And recognition can create one of the most convincing illusions in learning, the feeling of knowing. This is why someone can watch 50 videos about investing and still struggle to explain how an index fund works. Why someone can read 10 books about psychology and still repeat the same patterns in their own life. And why some people seem to become incredibly knowledgeable without spending their entire lives in classrooms. They aren't necessarily smarter. They've discovered something most education systems never explicitly teach: how to make your brain participate in learning. And there are 5 simple principles behind it. Not 5 complicated study techniques, 5 ways of thinking. Once you understand them, you can teach yourself almost anything. Imagine 2 people opening the same book. The first person says, "I'm going to learn neuroscience." The second asks, "Why do I lose focus after working for 2 hours, even when I actually want to finish the task?" They're reading the same book, but their brains aren't approaching it the same way. The second person is hunting. They're looking for an answer, and that changes everything. Your brain constantly receives far more information than it can deeply process. Attention acts like a selection mechanism. It determines what gets priority. And one of the easiest ways to give your brain a target is to start with a question. This is our first scientific fact. Curiosity can change how the brain processes incoming information. When you're genuinely trying to answer something, information that might otherwise seem irrelevant suddenly becomes meaningful. A paragraph about dopamine isn't just a paragraph anymore. It might contain the answer to your question. A chart isn't just a chart. It might explain something you've been trying to understand. This is why self-educated people often appear unusually curious. They're not necessarily consuming more information. They're searching for answers more deliberately. Before you open a book, video, course, or article, write down one question. Not, "What can I learn about investing?" Instead, "Why do professional investors still lose money?" Not, "I want to learn psychology." Instead, "Why does my brain keep avoiding tasks I know are important?" Then read specifically to answer that question. When you find the answer, write it down in your own words. You've just turned passive consumption into an investigation, and investigations are much harder for the brain to ignore. But there's a problem. You can have the perfect question and still learn almost nothing. Because before your brain can encode information, something else has to happen. You have to actually pay attention to it. Here's a strange experiment. Read this sentence. The average person receives thousands of pieces of sensory information every second. Now look around the room. You can see objects. You can hear sounds. You can feel your clothes against your skin. You can sense your body sitting in the chair. Your brain is receiving all of this, but you aren't consciously processing all of it, because you couldn't. Your brain has to decide what deserves deeper processing, and that gives us our second scientific fact. Attention is limited. This sounds obvious, but it completely changes how you should educate yourself, because most people try to learn by increasing the amount of information they consume. More books, more podcasts, more videos, more notes, more tabs, more courses. But self-education isn't a competition to collect information. It's a process of deciding what actually matters. Imagine you're reading a 300-page book. You don't need to remember 300 pages. You need to identify the handful of ideas that change how you understand the subject. So here's the practice. After every chapter, stop and ask, if I could keep only 3 ideas from this chapter, what would they be? Then write those 3 ideas. Now make the question harder. Which one of these ideas is actually useful? And finally, where would I use it? You've just converted information into knowledge, because knowledge becomes much more durable when it has a place to go. And this is where most people make another mistake. They read the important part again. They highlight it, they underline it, they stare at it. It feels productive. But your brain is about to teach you a very uncomfortable lesson. Seeing information again isn't the same as being able to produce it. Let's say you read a brilliant explanation of compound interest. You finish the page. Everything makes sense. You nod. Got it. Now close the book. Explain compound interest without looking. Suddenly, it's harder, maybe much harder. And that difficulty is actually good news, because you have just discovered the difference between recognition and retrieval. Recognition asks, does this look familiar? Retrieval asks, can I produce it myself? And your brain responds very differently to those situations. This is our third scientific fact. Repeatedly retrieving information from memory can strengthen long-term retention more effectively than simply rereading it. Researchers often call this the testing effect, and you don't need an exam to use it. You can turn almost anything into a test. Read a section, close the book, then ask yourself, what were the 3 main ideas? Don't look. Struggle for a moment. Try to reconstruct them. Then check the original. That tiny moment of struggle is valuable, because now your brain has to search, it has to reconstruct, it has to notice what it knows and what it doesn't. And here's where the method becomes even more powerful. Don't just ask, what did I read? Ask, why is it true? How would I explain it to someone else? What example would prove it? When would it stop being true? Now you're moving from remembering information to understanding it. And that takes us to the 4th method. Here's a simple thought experiment. Which is easier to remember, a random number, 739284, or 739284 is the combination to the locker you use every morning? The second one has context. It connects to something. Your brain doesn't store every new idea as an isolated object. New information becomes easier to work with when it connects to knowledge you already have. Think about learning the word mitochondria. You can memorize, mitochondria are organelles responsible for producing cellular energy. Or you can ask, what happens if cells can't produce enough energy? Suddenly the concept connects to fatigue, muscle function, metabolism, disease, exercise. The idea has somewhere to live. This is our 4th scientific fact. Information connected to existing knowledge is generally easier to understand and retrieve than isolated facts. So here's the practice. Whenever you learn something important, force yourself to make 3 connections. First, what does this remind me of? Second, how is this different from something I already know? Third, where could I use this in real life? Let's say you're learning about confirmation bias. You could memorize the definition, or you could connect it to your own life. When have I looked for evidence that proved I was right? Maybe it happened during an argument. Maybe when choosing a job. Maybe when reading news. Now the concept isn't just information, it's attached to an experience, and experiences give abstract ideas somewhere to anchor. But there's one more step. Because connecting an idea isn't enough. You have to be able to explain it. Try this. Take something you've just learned and explain it as if you're talking to a curious 12-year-old. No technical vocabulary, no copying the textbook, no hiding behind complicated language. Just explain the idea. If you get stuck, You found a gap, and that gap is incredibly valuable. Because the goal of self-education isn't to constantly feel like you understand. It's to discover exactly where you don't. Which brings us to the final method, and this one might be the most powerful of all. You don't need a classroom. You don't need students. You don't even need another person. After learning something, teach it out loud. Imagine someone sitting across from you asking, "Okay, explain it to me." Start from the beginning. Define the idea. Give an example. Explain why it works. Then imagine they interrupt. Why? Answer. But what if the opposite happened? Answer. How do you know? Answer. And eventually, you'll hit something you can't explain. That's the moment you were looking for. Because teaching exposes the difference between familiarity and mastery. You may have understood every sentence in the book, but if you can't reconstruct the idea without the book, your knowledge is still fragile. This is our fifth scientific fact. Explaining information to someone else can reveal gaps in your own understanding. And there's an even deeper reason this works. When you teach, you have to organize information. You have to decide what matters. You have to retrieve it. You have to connect ideas. You have to translate complicated concepts into simpler language. In other words, teaching forces you to perform almost every important part of learning at once. At the end of a learning session, record a 2-minute voice note. Pretend you're teaching the subject. Start with, "Here's the idea." Then explain it without looking at your notes. If you can't explain something, stop recording. Look it up. Return to the explanation. Try again. And here's a rule worth remembering. If you can't explain it simply, don't assume you're stupid. Assume you found the next thing you need to learn. That mindset changes everything. Because now confusion isn't failure, it's information. There's one final piece, and it's not another study technique, it's knowing when to stop. You can spend 3 hours forcing information into your head and then sleep for 4 hours. Or you can study deeply for an hour and give your brain the time it needs afterward. Because memory isn't finished when you close the book. During sleep, the brain continues processing and consolidating memories. This is our final scientific fact. Sleep is an important part of memory consolidation. So if you're trying to educate yourself, don't treat sleep as the enemy of productivity. It's part of the learning process. Your brain needs periods of quiet. It needs retrieval. It needs connections. And it needs time. So let's put everything together. If you want to teach yourself like an unusually effective learner, don't ask, "How much can I consume today?" Ask 5 different questions. 1. What question am I trying to answer? That gives your learning direction. 2. What actually deserves my attention? That prevents information overload. 3. Can I retrieve it without looking? That turns recognition into memory. 4. What does it connect to? That turns isolated facts into understanding. 5. Can I teach it clearly? That exposes the gaps. Then, stop, sleep, come back tomorrow and retrieve it again. Because becoming knowledgeable isn't about filling your head with more information. It's about changing what your brain can do with information. The person who reads 50 books but remembers almost nothing isn't necessarily becoming more educated. The person who reads one book, questions it, retrieves it, connects it, challenges it, and teaches it, may walk away with something much more valuable: understanding. And perhaps that's the real secret behind people who seem to educate themselves effortlessly. They aren't magically absorbing knowledge. They're repeatedly forcing their brains to work with it. So the next time you open a book, Don't begin with, "What can I learn from this?" Begin with, "What am I trying to understand?" Then close the book. Try to remember, make the connections, teach it, and let your brain finish the work. Because intelligence isn't just how much information you can collect, it's how deeply you can understand, retrieve, connect, and use it. And that is something you can teach yourself.